we're hoping to have this up on YouTube. We are going to record this. So we hope to have this up on YouTube here in the next couple of days. So, and again, if you guys have any questions, please feel free to reach out to any of us. So I will let the MPTI staff introduce themselves.
Great. I'm Dr. Lisa Herickhoff, and I'm the president of MPTI. I have with me today Amy Scharf. Amy has been the one behind the computer for the last couple of sessions, but she's an expert, so we decided we needed to have her expertise in front of the camera this time. And then we also have Myles Shepherd, soon to be Dr. Myles Shepherd, as soon as he finishes writing. So we have him, and you've met Myles the last couple times, so we're really excited to get this last one in the can.
Yeah. And then Bill, introduce yourself.
Okay. Well, I'm Bill Vandergrift, headquartered in Georgia these days, after spending a lot of time in Kentucky. But I do have a PhD in animal nutrition from Texas A&M back in 1980. And I have spent the last 40 years, 40, not 4. Yeah. Last 40 years, working with horses. I have operated a broodmare farm. My wife and I have done that together, and I also consult literally around the world with some of the largest breeding farms, and also in the consulting nutritionist for Triple Crown. So hopefully I can share with you some of the things I've learned over all those years.
Awesome. Well, if anybody's wondering, the guy behind me on the background is Justin Wright. He is actually a top money earner for the NCHRA. He is $1 million earner, and he's one of our Triple Crown sponsored writers. So we thought he would get to look over our shoulder tonight. So with all of that, I'll let you guys take it away.
Perfect. Well, last time we spent a lot of time talking about the male side of the equation, which is a very important side of the equation. It's where we spend most of our time and energy. But today we wanted to talk about mares, the other side of the equation. And like mares, like stallions, our take-home message last time was prepare early for your breeding season. We have a similar take-home message today, because that preparation is going to affect your success in that breeding shed. So, just like these horses that are executing now at the National Finals Rodeo, that mare is going to have to go through an event that's pretty endurance and requires a lot of energy and requires a lot of endurance. And so you have to prepare her early for that pregnancy event. So we thought to underscore the basis of nutrition, we thought we'd start with talking about reproduction and what kind of research has been done there recently. And so let's have a quick overview of the anatomy, Amy, and then let's go from there.
Yeah, so what we have up on a slide, I hope you all can see it, is a cartoon diagram on the left here and an actual photograph of a mare uterus and reproductive tract on the right. What we'll be talking about today in detail is ovulation from the ovary, which would be number 1 on this picture on the left, and being ovulated where that oocyte leaves the ovary and is caught by the fimbria or infundibulum and transported down through the oviduct where fertilization occurs into the uterine horn where they will implant and develop into your little fetus. And then full.
Perfect, thank you. So as we, I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought, and I was trying to drive the pointer and not trying to look at this. So this uterus changes over the course of the seasons, and there's a distinct seasonality to mares and to stallions as well. And so you want to talk about that a little bit and how that changes?
So mares are what we consider polyestrous seasonal long day breeders. And that just means is during winter when the days are short, especially here in Colorado and in the northern hemisphere or down in the deep southern hemisphere, you have those short days and they will not ovulate. So while they may present with a cycle, they're not actually ovulating and releasing that egg. Then when the days get longer, starting like April-ish, the light from the sun will then trigger a hormonal cascade within their bodies, creating these estrous cycles, and they'll repeat doing this until those days get shorter. Now, if you're on the equator or something similar, those days are always long, so they'll always be ovulating. But here we don't have that.
Yeah, one of the great things that this graph depicts is these estrus early in the year that do not have ovulation. In our region, Colorado, oftentimes we don't see that first estrus until March, but it will most likely be an anovulatory estrus. And so that really just kind of demonstrates that you should be starting to think about feeding your mare to have proper oocyte development during these times, so February, March, so that by the time you're actually recruiting follicles in April, they're developing with appropriate nutrition. Also, supplementation with some of your amino acids. Arginine is one in particular that really helps with perfusion around the follicle and aids in getting hormones to and from that site. So
Excellent. So speaking of getting your mare ready, I think we need to be careful to make sure that we say, don't let her be fat, don't let her be too thin, have her in that proper body condition that we've talked about in all of the last 2 sessions. We've talked about body condition being important and that we don't want her to be heavy. And what kind of impacts does that have, that heavy
Body condition is super important. You don't want them too skinny. You don't want them too large. So in the cases that they're really large, that can lead to insulin resistance, which changes their cyclicity, changes their follicular growth, even can cause like laminitis. That's not good to carry a bull with. And then in instances where they're really skinny, you can have chronic diseases, cardiovascular, metabolic diseases, which all harm the mare in general, and therefore her reproductive tract and reproductive success. Keeping them in ideal condition is important.
And I think even if you're on one of the edges, like a 4 or a 7, you can feed some things like L-carnitine, which will actually enhance their energy production, enhance that work in the ovaries and in the oocytes themselves, so that you can start producing good quality oocytes. So you can compensate a little bit nutritionally, I think, for some of those.
Yeah, and Bill will probably talk a lot about body condition score coming up. It's very important.
Yes. Yes.
Yep.
And that body condition and that feed, again, affects that hormones that are going to cause that cyclicity. So why don't we talk a little bit about the hormonal cascades that happen during ovulation?
Right. So as I mentioned earlier, as that light of daylight gets longer, you're going to start these cascades, such as follicular stimulating hormone, making the follicles on those ovaries grow. Estrogen will also increase, and that will be from those growing follicles until ovulation. Then once you ovulate, you're going to, from that site, you'll produce what's called a corpus luteum, and that's that location of that ovulation. And that is what's going to produce progesterone and prime that uterus for potential implantation. And if that doesn't occur and that feedback from that developing embryo doesn't occur, you're going to have a drop of that progesterone, and you'll just recycle and keep recycling until you either get pregnant or the days get too short.
Mm-hmm. So something that's a little bit different from the Stallions follicular waves is that there's a lot more hormones happening at different levels. And so estrogen is actually also a derivative of things like cholesterol, same as testosterone. And so having proper energy levels in your diet, but also having your omega acids to be able, or your omega fatty acids to be able to produce things like PGF2 alpha and whatnot are pretty important.
Yes. Now you talked about that follicle, Amy, a little bit. But the ovary itself of the mare and the follicle are pretty unique in mares, right? So
Mares are special.
Yes, they are special. I have one of those special ones in my barn.
Horses are unique and special for their many reasons, and one of those is reproductively is their ovary, which is inside out basically. So in humans and other mammals, when you ovulate and you think of an ovary ovulating, it's ovulating from all points on different outside of the ovary. In mares, that's not the case. In fact, they only ovulate from this inner portion called the ovulation fossa, and all of their ovulation will occur from there, be caught by those fimbria or infundibulum, and be transferred to the oviduct for fertilization. Another fun thing about oogenesis is all the eggs you'll have in your life will be developed while you're a fetus. So that mare nutrition while she's pregnant is also leading to the nutrition of that developing embryo or fetus. And when you're thinking early term in that pregnancy, the reproductive tract is also being developed in females especially. So you need to think not now, but also think for the future that nutrition is super important.
So you can affect generations down the road by feeding them having better nutrition.
Yeah, that's
from the
right.
get-go.
That's right.
That's genetically and reproductively.
Yeah.
Super important. Well, yeah. That's us.
So you were talking a little bit about these follicular waves. Does that affect the ovary itself?
Yeah, it definitely does. So mare's ovaries change in size with their hormones and the development of follicles. In your off season, that ovary could be the size of a peanut in this big mare. And then come to season or getting closer to that ovary with its expanding follicles can get to the size of a fist or even a small grapefruit just with all of those big follicles. So that's one way you can test their cycling is that palpation of those ovaries, because it's very different whether they're cycling or not cycling.
So does nutrition play a role in these, in the size of this ovary, and how does that affect it? I imagine you need some nutrition to make that grow and those follicles grow.
Yeah, well, I'm not going to go towards size. Maybe Amy can explain that, but I mean, similar to stallions, while those oocytes are being recruited, you need to have proper antioxidants present at that site, because if you cause DNA damage, again, you're likely going to end up with a poor oocyte. You could lose the pregnancy pretty early.
Yeah, the body condition score of a mare is super important. If she has enough, if she's healthy and she's cycling, that ovary will be cycling as well, and those follicles will be developing. But if you're not having that cyclicity because of, say, a deficiency somewhere, you're not going to see that big growth.
I see. So I know that in addition to the ovary being quite different, her cervix is different as well. So in a cow, you have cervical rings. And so when you're inseminating, you can feel those cervical rings and you can feel going past there. But again, as you said, Mare is special. So she has folds that run longitudinally. And so they actually, it makes it quite easy to artificially inseminate these mares.
Yeah, artificial insemination is just one of the common uses of, or fertilization techniques you can use in addition to live cover. There's also techniques that are more advanced and I guess more snazzy techniques such as ICSI, also known as intracytoplasmic sperm injection. It's a pretty advanced, newer, but not new technique that the human industry and other animal industries use, especially the equine industry, where you can take an oocyte, either harvest it directly from that ovary or flush it once it's ovulated from that uterus, and you can actually inject a single sperm. As you can see with this laser, a single sperm gets injected into that oocyte to force fertilization. And you wait a few days and you get your embryo and transfer that into the uterus.
Now, this is most commonly seen in, say, mares that are still competing and they don't want to give them an off season. So they'll do this so that the mares can stay in competition. Another
So
really,
they're not transferring that embryo back into that mare.
correct, or they'll do flushes, embryo flushes, but more importantly, they're using semen from stallions that have limited semen supply in this process. So stallions that have died, and maybe there was only 100 straws left on him. And so that allows that stallion to continue producing offspring long after he's gone. And it's also worth noting that ICSI takes a while. It can take up to 6 estrus cycles to get a successful embryo. So that again underscores that need to have proper nutrition. If your mare's being fed properly, that nutrient profile is going to be present in the cytoplasm of the oocyte. It's going to increase your success of producing a healthy embryo, and also increases your ability to well, it decreases the amount of cycles that it takes to get your embryo. Now, the other thing I'm going to point out here is in the bottom right corner of this slide are some images of some healthy horse embryos. Normally, you would be able to see what's called the inner cell mass, which is the part of the embryo that's going to become the fetus. But these embryos are quite dark, and that's because under this type of microscopy, you can't see it because there's a lot of lipids. And so again, energy in your diet is really important for horses.
Fat in the diet, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So beyond the uterus itself, I think the embryo is pretty unique in horses, isn't it?
Mares are special. So mares, they share this in common with rabbits, but not really anybody else, is they have what's called a capsule that surrounds their embryo. And this capsule is theorized to aid in the mechanical structure of this embryo while it undergoes another unique process of embryo migration. So after fertilization, the embryo will take a few 10 days to get into the uterus, where it will then migrate every 20 to 60 minutes to a new location. And it will do this for 15 or so days before fixing into the side of the uterine wall. And they think this is for maternal recognition, so this communication between this developing embryo and the endometrium of the uterus to signal, hey, I'm here, keep it going, I'm going to implant soon, don't forget I'm here, you put me here. And it's a very important mechanism that's fairly unique to the horse.
Looks like a pinball machine.
Yes. Then while we're talking about the uterus, I've been doing a lot of work for the past year in the postpartum uterus of dairy cattle. And just like in dairy cattle, most mare owners are wanting to decrease the foaling interval. So they're wanting to breed back as soon as possible. And improving the uterine environment and allowing it to recover quickly is really important. So again, amino acids, proper amino acid content aids in uterine recovery, so the involution of the uterus. And therefore it'll also decrease the foaling interval. It's also important for recipient mares. So before you're breeding, if you are questioning the integrity of the uterus, those amino acids can aid in flushing fluid from the uterus. Again, because those mares have longitudinal folds for a cervix, when they're in estrus, everything's open and it will flow out. But also having enough DHA in the diet is going to elicit a proper immune response during recovery. And again, antioxidants are going to help in that cell turnover.
Well, I think one thing that's important that before we go away from this uterus slide is that there's a different placentation device. Once that little embryo stops bouncing around, pinballing around, it actually is quite different. Maybe you want to talk about that placentation, since you get to talk about all the fun stuff in the mare.
Mares are special.
We love them.
Yes, they have what's called a diffuse placentation, which is probably the most inefficient placentation type in the animal kingdom. And that just underscores how important the uterine environment, getting it prepared for that embryo, and then the proper nutrition so that mare can provide all that nutrition to that fetus through this very inefficient placentation type.
We always say that reproductive inefficiency is expensive, and it's even more so in horses.
Yeah.
So making sure you're increasing your chances is vital.
Absolutely, absolutely. So let's move on. We have a pregnancy now.
Oh, look, there's a beautiful baby foal. And how we can diagnose this pregnancy is just like on this picture here, is with ultrasound, ultrasonography. By 15 days, 2 weeks, you can ultrasound them to check if they're pregnant, and then you can keep checking them intermittently throughout their pregnancy. As it's fairly common, so let's say 30% of pregnancies are lost between days 0 and 15. So you don't even know that they're pregnant, or you test something and you're like, they're pregnant, but then you ultrasound them and they're not pregnant. That's 30% loss. And then another 8% of pregnancy loss occurs between that day 15 and day 25. And then on top of that, another 8% before that 35 day. So it's, once again, super important that your embryo itself is developing in proper nutrition, so the oocyte is healthy, once, like we talked about last week, that sperm is healthy, so the embryo is healthy, that uterine environment is healthy to keep that pregnancy going.
Absolutely, absolutely. So let's assume we get a full-term pregnancy, we get to foaling. There's some interesting effects of nutrition and all sorts of little components in that milk that are going to affect that foal, right?
Right. So one way that you can use to predict when they might go into foal is an increase in that potassium around 4 or 5 days before they foal. And then an increase in calcium around 2 days. So you can use this as a predictive measure. There's also things that you can provide to that mare while they're after parturition, so their milk is healthy.
Yeah, well, I would say before parturition as well, because you want some of these things in the colostrum. So vitamin E, vitamin A are pretty important for healthy immune function. But also having the correct amount of iodine in the milk will increase the thyroid hormone in the foal, and it helps with that transition from being in utero to being out in the environment. And so, yeah, iodine's another one of those important ones.
Yeah, I bet Bill will talk all about what kind of specific nutrients you should think about when you're before, during, and after.
So with that, let's turn it over to
Bill. Okay, well, thank you very much. Actually, before I get into the slides, I do want to I guess, build on what you've already presented. I think you've given us some very good information that everybody can build upon, and I love what you said, because mayors are special. And one of the things I was going to share with everybody tonight is, when we breed horses, there is so much emphasis placed on the stallion. Who's the sire of this foal and so forth. But in reality, it's the brood mare that is the most important parameter in that equation. Now, obviously, you want to breed your mare to a good stallion. It's not like you can't just breed them to any old boy out there and end up with a world champion. So that the stallion is very important, as we indicated, but the genetics and the maternal effects that the brood mare is going to impart on the foal is actually greater than the stallion. And this is why, especially with race horses, you'll see an individual mare will have multiple stakes winning foals, and whereas other mares won't have any, regardless of who they're bred to. So if you breed figuratively speaking, if you breed a plug to, American Pharaoh, well, you end up with an expensive plug. So, whereas if you've got a high class mare and you breed them to a high class stallion, then your chances are better. So it goes back to the old adage: you breed the best to the best and you hope for the best. So we never can lose sight of the fact that, the mare herself is a more important parameter in the equation of producing successful foals. So that is why managing these mares and feeding these mares is so critical, because you are dealing with the more important half. And so my wife's not in the room at the moment. I won't allow her to hear that. But really, it's, people talk about where's your better half. Well, there's a lot of truth. That is the better half, so to speak. So that being said, we mentioned body condition score, and I think you covered that well. You don't want your mares too skinny. You don't want your mares too fat. So just a moderate body condition score, and you had indicated the same as I do. I recommend people keep their mares in a score of between 5 and 6, using the Henneke body condition score. And an interesting experience that I had that I can share with you in relation to that, and this was many years ago. I was started to work with a very large breeding farm, and their nutrition program left a lot to be desired. Let's put it that way. But the reason it left a lot to be desired is the pasture quality that they had was excellent. And so, especially in the springtime, the protein content of their pastures on a dry matter basis was averaging 25, 27%, and with very high energy. So these mares consuming this grass, were getting all the protein and energy they needed. In fact, they were too fat. And when the owner asked me what I thought of his mares, I was very blunt with him. And I said, well, to be honest, we don't have brood mares here. What we got are basketballs with 4 feet hanging off of them. And I mean, we had, 8s and 9s, and 7, 8s, and 9s is body condition score. And the trace mineral program, so your zinc and your copper and your manganese and your iodine and your selenium and your supplemental vitamins was almost non-existent. They're like, well, what do we need to supplement? These mares are shiny, they're fat, etc. So we explained why their reproductive success, though, wasn't all that good. It was easy to explain to them why we had all kinds of structural deformities in the foals, etc. But one of the things that happened, and this is what I want to share with you. So we made adjustments to the feeding program. Obviously, we fortified the feeding program correctly. We started using some immune stimulators to improve the quality of the colostrum, improve the inflammation scores, or reduce the inflammation scores with the mares. And the next year, we had very successful breeding success, but there was a major complaint. And the complaint was that previously they had a lot of mares that would get pregnant on foal heat. Okay, which is one of those things you always want to, you talked about shortening up the foaling cycle. And so if you can get a mare pregnant on foal heat, some people think, consider that to be desirable, and this farm did. And so now all of a sudden their mares weren't getting pregnant on foal heat, and therefore they were about ready to, take the program we had put together and go back to what they were doing. And I was a little bit puzzled by this. And so this is where it's critical that you ask the correct questions. And so we finally asked the question that needed to be asked, and that was, well, when are your mares coming into foal heat? Well, now with the revised program, these mares were coming into foal heat around 5 or 6 days post-foaling. And I said, okay, well, when were they coming into foal heat, before we changed things? And they went back to their records, and they weren't coming into heat. So what they were calling foal heat, in other words, the first heat post-foaling, they weren't cycling until 18 days afterwards. Okay. So that goes back to the uterus being conditioned, recovering from the foaling process, etc. So A mare that's not coming into heat for 18 days post-foaling is going to be more receptive to becoming pregnant again versus a mare that's already cycling at, say, 4, 5, or 6 days post-foaling. So when we pointed that out, it's one of those aha moments for them. And then we said, okay, so they're not getting pregnant on, quote unquote, foal heat, but then on their next cycle, what's our breeding success? And it's like, oh, it's very good. So we actually did accomplish what we wanted to, but I guess I share that with you because it underscores essentially what y'all presented earlier in terms of how that uterus is going to behave, the timing of that uterus being reconditioned, how important it is for that uterus to be in condition to become pregnant again, as well as the cycling situation is concerned. But the other thing that comes into play, and I guess we'll talk about this, is when we talk about nutrition for brood mares, there's really two aspects of it. One is, how do we manage and feed these brood mares so that they become pregnant in the first place? Okay. The other aspect of it is, how do we manage and feed these brood mares so that they produce a healthy, sound foal that can then go on and be a competitive athlete? And fortunately, you can hit two birds with one stone, okay, most of the time. So if you're feeding and managing the mare in a way that's going to increase her chances of becoming pregnant, at the end of the day, you're also going to be feeding her and managing her in a way that she's going to be able to produce a healthy, sound foal that can go on to be a champion. So if we can go ahead and put the slides back up there, we can kind of.
Should be good.
Okay. So what I wanted to share with you is how the mare's nutrient requirements change as she goes from being barren to pregnant into lactation. And we're going to start off with protein requirements. Now, barren means that she's not lactating, and obviously she's not pregnant. Most of the time, we want our mares to be either pregnant and or lactating. So, but there are going to be mares, maiden mares that have skipped a year. They're going to be barren, they're going to be empty, and they're not lactating. Those mares essentially are just horses at maintenance. And you can see their protein requirement is actually fairly low, expressed in terms of grams per day. It's only about 750. You can go ahead and round it up, 800 grams of protein per day. That's very easy to satisfy. If you've got good quality forage, most of these mares can get all the protein they need just on a forage-based diet. And that really shouldn't be much of a surprise because that's how the horse is designed. They're constant grazers. They're designed to consume forage as their primary foodstuff. Now, when they become pregnant, their protein requirement is going to increase 32% above what it was when they were at maintenance or when they were barren. But even an increase of 32%, we're now looking at about 950 grams of protein required per day. That level of protein is still going to be very easy to meet with a good quality forage program. Now, if your forage quality is not good, maybe it's the middle of winter and you're living in an area where the pastures are 3 feet under snow, and so you're on a hay-based diet, the quality of your hay might be questionable. I've actually worked with farms that had issues with their brood mares, and when we analyzed the hay, it came back a whopping 4% protein. So obviously then 4% protein is not going to be great enough to satisfy the protein requirement here. So my rule of thumb is if you've got hay that's at least 10% protein, that's going to satisfy the protein requirement for your barren mares and your pregnant mares. And then when she goes from pregnancy into lactation, you can see we get a 100% increase in the protein requirement compared to what she was when she was pregnant. Okay, so it's even greater than 100% when you compare it to when she was barren. So when she begins to make milk, that is when the protein requirement really shoots up. And now it's going to be difficult to satisfy that protein requirement just on a forage-based program, unless you've got extremely good pastures, as I indicated with the story I was sharing with you, where the protein content of the pastures on a dry matter basis was 25, 27%. So those mares were still getting enough protein just off the pastures. But for a lot of us, we're going to have to supplement these brood mares with some type of, grain, some type of protein source in order to get enough protein into them while they're lactating. Now, also keep in mind that the protein requirement in terms of grams per day for a lactating mare is going to be directly proportional to how much milk she's producing. Okay. We don't select brood mares based on their milk production. Okay. We select Holstein dairy cows based on their milk production, but we don't select brood mares based on milk production. We select brood mares with other parameters. I'll just put it that way. So as a result, there's a tremendous amount of variability between individual mares on how much milk they will produce. There are some mares at peak lactation may only produce 15 pounds of milk a day, which really is probably not going to be adequate to provide a good growth rate for their foal. On the other hand, we can have mares that'll produce as much as, and this has been measured, I'm not just pulling these numbers out of the air. We've had mares that have produced 55 pounds of milk per day.
Wow.
So these are extremely heavy milking mares. And obviously then their protein requirement is going to be quite high. So, but how much milk on the average, okay, would you expect your mare to produce? Because very few of us are going to go out there and milk our mares to see how much milk they're producing. Okay. But research has demonstrated that on the average, a mare is going to produce 3% of her body weight in milk. So that means if you take your approximately 30 pounds of milk per day. Okay. So, and it'll be plus or minus depending upon the individual mare. But that level of milk production should be adequate to provide a good growth rate for the foal. Now, what about the mare that's producing 55 pounds of milk a day? How much of that milk is that foal going to produce? And that's a question I like to throw out to a lot of folks because it gets them thinking. And the answer is all of it. So a foal will generally consume all the milk a mare can produce. So if you've got a foal that is taking in 55 pounds of milk a day, what's going to be the growth rate or the body weight condition of that foal? You're going to have a heavy foal. It's going to be predisposed to some structural issues because the mare is overfeeding it the same way that if you had put it in a stall and loaded it up with grain, overfeeding it. So those are special cases that are going to have to be managed in a special way. But just, you will, if you raise enough foals off enough mares, eventually you're going to run into those. And so you need to be thinking about, okay, how am I going to manage these foals that are coming off these mares that are producing a tremendous amount of milk? You can tell how much milk a mare produces essentially by looking at the body condition and the growth rate of the foal. So a mare that's not producing much milk, you're going to have a skinny foal that's not growing very fast. You're also going to have a foal that's going to tend to take an interest in consuming dry feed at a very young age, younger than the rest of the herd mates. So that's an indication that mom's milk production isn't quite what it needs to be. So in those cases, you may actually essentially fire mama and bring in a nurse mare and let the nurse mare raise the foal, or you may have to supplement the foal with some milk replacer. That's been done as well. But you can essentially figure out approximately how much milk that mare is producing simply by looking at the growth rate of the foals. So I guess I need you to advance the slides for me. So I need the next slide.
Here we go.
Okay. Energy takes the same type of pattern as protein, but you can see the increases aren't as great. And again, when a mare is barren or at maintenance, it should be fairly easy to meet her daily energy requirement. When she becomes pregnant, her energy requirement does increase, but it only increases 22%. So again, should be real easy to meet a pregnant mare's energy requirement. If you've got a pregnant mare that's not lactating, that you're having trouble maintaining body condition score on, you've probably got some physiological issues going on, which are preventing her from utilizing her nutrients very well. Because a non-lactating pregnant mare should be able to maintain her body condition fairly easily without a lot of extra feed. However, again, when she starts lactating, you'll see the energy requirement increases 59, round that up, 60% above what it was when she was pregnant. Now, keep that in mind. How much did protein increase? Protein increased 100%. So energy only increases 60%. Now, a 60% increase is substantial. Okay, don't let me de-emphasize that. So the energy requirement does increase significantly when this mare lactates. But which one's more critical for the lactating mare, the protein or the energy? And the answer is the protein. So by the time you meet the protein requirement for that lactating mare, the majority of the time, the energy requirement will also have been met. So if you've got a lactating mare that's losing body condition, that tells you that, she's producing more milk than her diet will support. Therefore, she's got to pull nutrients off of her body to produce that milk. So she's going to lose body condition score. The first thing you need to be thinking about is it's probably a situation where she's not getting enough protein. So alfalfa, a higher protein feed, maybe even have to supplement with straight soybean meal. That's been done, which is a high protein supplement, some way to get more protein into that mare. And along those lines, sometimes we have these mares that are, heavy milking mares. You know that because the foals are fat and they're growing fast and they're showing very little interest in any type of supplemental feed because they don't need it. They're getting everything they need from mom's milk. So a question I get asked then is, well, what can I do then, to reduce the mare's milk production? Can't I just feed her less and have her milk production come down? No, unfortunately, you can't. Now, if you do reduce protein and energy intake, you might reduce milk production a little bit, but that's the problem. You're only going to reduce it a little bit. She's still going to try to produce as much milk as what she is genetically programmed to produce. So if you reduce her protein and energy intake in an effort to reduce her milk production, what's going to happen? She's just going to pull that extra protein and energy she needs to make the amount of milk she's programmed to make off of her body. And then her body condition score is going to drop, which means when you're going to try to get her rebred, she's going to be in a negative protein, negative energy balance. and that's going to make it more difficult to get her rebred. So that is a practice that I see, a fair number of people try, but I really recommend against trying to do that, because more times than not, you're going to work against yourself. Okay, next slide, please. So with calcium and phosphorus requirements, this time we have a little bit different pattern. Notice with calcium, when we go from being barren to pregnant, the calcium requirement here increases 86%. Whereas when we go from pregnancy to lactation, it increases only 17%. So you can see that the big jump in calcium and also phosphorus, look at phosphorus, jumps up 120% when she's pregnant. So the big jump for calcium and phosphorus occurs when your mare becomes pregnant. Even though milk production requires a lot of calcium and phosphorus, pregnancy is the event which really increases calcium and phosphorus requirements the most. So this, I'm going to stop right here. And here's one of those take-home messages that I hope everybody goes home with. When you're thinking about lactation, think protein and energy, okay? Primarily protein. When you're thinking pregnancy, think minerals and vitamins, okay? That's the difference between those two stages of the mare's reproductive life, okay? So lactation, protein, energy. Gestation, minerals and vitamins. So this is why it's so critical for these pregnant mares to receive adequate mineral and vitamin intake, not only for their own physiological needs, but you're also then going to be supplying the developing foal. Why does calcium requirement increase so much during gestation? Because she's not only maintaining her skeleton, she's trying to develop another equine skeleton. And as we all know, the skeletal structure of a horse is all important, okay? Lameness means you're out of business, so to speak. So a sound skeletal structure is a foundation necessity. Calcium and phosphorus intake and nutrition during pregnancy is where the foundation of that skeleton is laid down. Once that foal is born, if it doesn't have the right foundation for a sound skeleton, that train's already left the station, folks, okay? You're probably not going to be able to catch up if you've got a very weak skeletal structure. Now, you can improve it, yes, but the goal is to have that foal born with a good foundation to its skeletal structure. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, zinc and copper. Now we've got yet a different pattern. When we go from being barren to pregnant, our zinc and our copper requirements increase substantially. A 35% increase in zinc requirement is a substantial increase, okay? So you need to be aware that zinc and copper requirements do jump way up when the mare's pregnant. But look what happens when she lactates. The zinc and copper requirement in this case actually go down. So she needs more zinc and copper when she's pregnant than she does when she's lactating. And again, why is that? It's not only to maintain all of her tissues, but again, a lot of that zinc and that copper are going to be utilized and stored by the foal, by the fetus. And really we haven't talked much about the nutrient content of mare's milk, but mare's milk does contain zinc and copper, but it doesn't contain a lot. So the foal, during its first 3 weeks of life, its primary supply of zinc and copper are its stores that it lays down in its liver while it's in utero, while it's developing. So jumping around a little bit, when does a foal first start to take interest in eating dry feed. Okay. Now, obviously, a lot of variability there. I've literally had foals put their head in the feeder with their mama and start eating dry feed day 2. Okay. That's unusual, right? On the average, a foal will take noticeable interest. Let me, I guess, word it that way. You'll see a foal take noticeable interest in consuming dry feed when they're about 3 weeks old. Okay. That's not a coincidence. If the broodmare is fed correctly and the foal has adequate zinc and copper stores in its liver when it's born, how long do those zinc and copper stores last? You got it, 3 weeks. Okay. So when that zinc and copper begins to be used up from the body stores that it laid down when it was inside its mama, guess what happens? It starts to take an interest in dry feed, and that's where it's now going to get its zinc and copper and other mineral vitamin nutrients. So you can see how all of these things now all start to kind of fit together, and you see a pattern and you see a reason for that pattern. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, we look at vitamin A and E. Excuse me, let me get a little sip of water here. Now, previously, we talked about how important it is for the mare to have proper antioxidant intake for normal follicular function, normal uterine health, etc. So between the mare being barren and the mare becoming pregnant, again, that's the big jump in vitamin A and vitamin E requirements. A goes up 76%, vitamin E goes up 135% when she's pregnant. It doesn't change. Vitamin A doesn't change when she's lactating. Vitamin E actually decreases a little bit. 6%, no big deal. I basically tell folks, she needs the same amount of vitamin E when she's pregnant as she does when she's lactating. So again, very important for these mares to get adequate vitamin A and vitamin E. Now, in the graph that you shared with us earlier, you demonstrated correctly that under normal natural situations, a mare begins to cycle later on in the spring, March, April, May. That's the normal breeding season for a mare. But what do we do as horse breeders? Okay. As you know, all horses have a birthday January 1st. So if you have a foal that's born December 31st, guess what? The very next day, it's a year old, technically speaking. That's why foals born on December 31st never get found until January 1st. Okay. And I know there's debate about that, but in my personal opinion, it's like, come on, folks, really? If it's born at the end of December, it's the next year's foal. That I'll get off my soapbox on that one. But the point being is January 1, all horses have a birth date. So that's the reason why you see the push to have foals born in January, February, March. But I think most of us understand, and we need to understand, that's not the way the horse was designed, by God. Okay. He actually designed them to be fertile later on in the year. So, but here's what I want to discuss with you. Especially, I mentioned, what if you live up north? What if you live in Colorado? Okay. And January, February, March, you got these foals being born. You've got these mares that are now lactating. You're trying to get them rebred. Vitamin A, vitamin E, very important for them, but they're on a hay-based diet. How much vitamin A and vitamin E is in hay? Not much. Okay. When you dry grass, the vitamin A and the vitamin E levels drop like a rock. So it's imperative that you supplement these mares with some type of product that's going to give them the vitamin A levels and the vitamin E levels that they need. Now, if you've worked with mares enough, even though you may have supplemented mares correctly in, say, January, February, where there's no pasture grass, you'll have some that are just really hard to get pregnant at that point in time. But then time goes on, and here comes March or April, and here comes the spring grass, and you've got them out on pasture, and the next thing you know, you breed them, and guess what? They're pregnant. Okay. What happened? Okay. What happened was that green grass is not only very high in vitamin A and vitamin E, it's also high in a lot of other phytonutrients, as we call them, which have antioxidant activity. That, it's the only way that mare can get those is off of fresh green grass. And now she becomes fertile and she gets pregnant. So again, it underscores the comments that were made earlier in relation to follicular activity and the whole reproductive cycle, how important some of these nutrients are for the normal function of not the reproductive cycle and all of the reproductive tissues that come into play. Okay, I think that was the last slide I had, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And I think we have some questions.
Okay.
You're gonna have to pull them up big so I can.
Oh yeah, we're getting late. So yeah, let's get to the questions. I could talk on and on. So let's get to the questions.
Another one, Bill.
It's exciting subjects. We like.
Yeah. Yeah. The screen froze. Mandy, I don't know if you can hear me or not. I can't hear anything from your side.
Hold please, sorry.
Okay.
Sorry, give us just a minute. We'll get.
The computer shut itself down like right when we were trying to pull up the questions. So
Okay.
We had a very, very
So sorry. We've been doing so well.
Yep.
It just crashed.
I think I can get to them.
Okay.
Well, we got them.
Can you see them? Oh, yes. So question is, I have a 6-year-old mare that we've been considering breeding. She had a low positive case of EPM with very slight symptoms of just being stiff. Treated and been fine since. Would you breed her? I'm hearing contradictory info about breeding a horse that has had EPM.
That has to be handled on a case-by-case basis, obviously. I do know of mares that have had EPM, and emphasis on the word had, that have been bred successfully. It's kind of falls in the same category as a performance horse that gets EPM. We can treat these horses, we can help them recover, but once they're recovered, they can return to competition, and some of those do well. Others, never really get back to the same level that they were competing at previously. So translating that or transferring that into a brood mare, as long as your veterinarian feels that she has recovered, in other words, she's no longer symptomatic, she's no longer neurologic, there shouldn't be much of a problem of breeding her. Keep in mind, EPM is not a genetic condition. Okay, so it's not a situation where she's going to pass EPM onto the foal. That said, however, a lot of horses will be more susceptible to EPM because they have subpar immune function. And some of these mares that have a low immune function will pass that on to the foals. So the foals will have low immune function as well, which then makes them more predisposed to conditions such as EPM. So with those foals, or with those mares, though, you want to do everything you can to boost their immune system, boost their immune function, and reduce systemic inflammation as much as possible.
And that also might be a good place to use something in something like an ICSI.
Or
some
embryo
kind
flush.
of, yes, or an embryo flush, some kind of assisted reproductive technique so that you can get around some of the potential problems.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
All right, so our next question is, are the targeted levels just discussed for an average weight for the mare? For an instance, I raise Friesians and they tend to weigh a bit more than a saddlebred.
When we say the target values, are we talking about like the protein and energy values?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Protein and energy requirements are going to be dependent upon body weight and body size. So obviously a larger horse, whether it's a Friesian or heck, it could just be a large thoroughbred for that matter. A thoroughbred mare that weighs 1,500 pounds is going to need more protein and energy than a thoroughbred mare that weighs 1,000 pounds. So yes, you'll need to increase the protein and energy numbers, for those larger breed horses such as the Friesians. But the milk production level is still essentially whole. She's still going to produce somewhere around 3% of her body weight in milk. But a lot of those you'll see probably 2.5% to 3% is probably more than norm for a Friesian. Okay.
Perfect.
Looks like that's all of our questions.
That is all of our questions, so we'll go ahead and wrap it up. Thank you everybody that has joined us for this one and the previous two. This has been a lot of fun, and huge thank you to you guys for all your help in putting this together and letting me
thank
be
you for
here.
inviting us. We just really appreciate the opportunity. We love talking about reproduction, and that's what we do every day. So we really appreciate talking about it. And Bill, it's been a pleasure to do this with you. We really appreciate getting to know you a little more.
Thank you very much. That's a two-way street.
Yeah, thank you, Bill. So if you guys have any questions, please feel free again to email me. I'm the one that sent you out the code to log in tonight, and we'll get those questions answered, and then we will have this up on YouTube, the Triple Crown YouTube channel, and links to it on Facebook here in the next couple of days.
Excellent. Merry Christmas, everyone.
Merry Christmas, Happy New Year.
Merry Christmas. All right. Take
All right.
care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.